Behind the Mask, a detective's tale of deception and murder. Detective Shernan investigates. The wife who fooled everyone. Disclaimer: this is based on a true story. Names have been changed to protect the identities of those involved. This content is intended for mature viewers 18 and contains descriptions of crime scenes that some may find disturbing. Viewer discretion is advised. Please do not attempt to imitate any actions described in this story. Case summary: the morning fog hadn't lifted when I got the call about a body discovered in Oakwood City. As Detective Shernan, I've seen my share of murder scenes, but this one would test even my experienced instincts. A young demolition worker named Takashi Yamada, beloved for his kindness despite his rugged appearance, found strangled in his own van. The electrical cord wrapped tightly around his neck told me this wasn't random, it was personal. What unfolded over the next 2 months was one of the most calculated deceptions I've ever encountered. Takashi's widow, Naomi, captured the community's sympathy with her profound displays of grief. She wept uncontrollably at the funeral, wrote heartfelt messages to the press asking for privacy, and publicly declared her hatred for the unknown killer. "I want to kill him," she told reporters, her voice breaking with emotion. But something wasn't adding up. Physical evidence at Naomi's bar, surveillance footage showing someone else driving Takashi's van, and some peculiar financial decisions made shortly before the murder pointed in a disturbing direction. When we finally arrested Naomi and her lover Hiroshi 2 months later, the community was stunned. The woman who had performed grief so convincingly was the architect of her husband's murder. This case reveals the terrifying reality that sometimes the person closest to you, the one who should love you most, can become your executioner. As I pieced together how a rebellious bar owner with a history of failed marriages orchestrated this crime, I was reminded that beneath the mask of tears, a cold, calculating mind can hide in plain sight. If you appreciate true crime analysis, be sure to like and subscribe for more cases from my files. Now, let's dive deeper into how the perfect wife became the perfect suspect. The investigation begins. The call came in at 5:47 a.m. on a Sunday morning in May 2018. I was already on my 3rd cup of coffee, reviewing case files at my desk, when the phone rang. Rain was tapping against my office window as I grabbed my coat and headed to the scene. Strangulation victim found in Oakwood Heights. Possible homicide, the dispatcher said, her voice calm but urgent. When I arrived at the residential parking lot, uniformed officers had already secured the perimeter. The victim's silver van stood out against the gray morning, its doors unlocked, keys still in the ignition. I approached carefully, the gravel crunching under my boots. "Morning, Detective Shernan." Officer Miller nodded as I ducked under the yellow tape. Victim's stepson found him about 40 minutes ago. Poor kid's pretty shaken up. I peered into the back seat and saw him Takashi Yamada, 25 years old, lying awkwardly across the seat. An electrical cord, about 3 feet long, was wrapped tightly around his neck. Above his left eye, evident signs of a struggle. His wallet was still there, cash untouched. "This wasn't robbery," I muttered, snapping on my gloves. "This was personal." I spent the next hour examining the scene, taking notes, and interviewing the first responders. The forensic team arrived and began their methodical process. The victim's stepson, a young man named Kenji, sat on a nearby curb, staring into nothing. "I need to talk to the family," I told my partner, Detective Reynolds, starting with the wife. Let's see what she has to say about her husband's last movements. What I didn't know then was that I was about to meet one of the most convincing performers I'd ever encountered in my 20 years on the force. Someone who could cry on cue, whose trembling hands and grief-stricken face would fool not just me, but an entire community. What do you think, folks? Was this a crime of passion or something more calculated? Have you ever known someone who could lie so convincingly that even professionals couldn't tell? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more cases from my files. The woman who answered the door was Naomi Yamada, 46, the victim's wife. Her face was pale, eyes reed-rimmed from crying. She invited us in with shaking hands, collapsing into a chair in her living room. She appeared completely devastated. "I can't believe he's gone," she whispered, clutching a tissue. "Who would do this to Takashi? Everyone loved him." According to Naomi, Takashi had finished work around 1 a.m. and stopped by her small bar for a few drinks. Around 4 a.m., he drove home to rest. At 5 a.m., he called to say he was almost home. But after that, she couldn't reach him, despite several attempts. Worried, she called her son Kenji to check on Takashi. "When did you last speak with your husband, Mrs. Yamada?" I asked, watching her carefully. 5 in the morning, she replied, her voice breaking. "He said he was almost home. I tried calling again, but..." She broke down, unable to continue. Her grief seemed genuine, the trembling hands, the difficulty speaking, the tears that kept coming, despite her attempts to compose herself. I'd interviewed countless people in the immediate aftermath of losing loved ones. Naomi's reactions fit the profile perfectly. Too perfectly, perhaps. "I need to ask about your relationship with Takashi," I continued gently. "Were there any problems? Any arguments recently?" She shook her head emphatically. "We were happy. So happy. Ask anyone who saw us together. We always held hands in public. We traveled together. He just bought us a new house." She looked up at me with tear-filled eyes. Who would want to hurt him? I left that first interview with mixed feelings. Her story seemed straightforward, her grief palpable. But something nagged at me, a detective's instinct that saved my career more times than I can count. "What do you think?" Reynolds asked as we walked back to the car. I paused, looking back at the house. "I think we need to look at the surveillance cameras near her bar. And I want to know more about Naomi Yamada's background." Digging deeper, the next few days were a flurry of activity. While Naomi became the public face of grief organizing her husband's funeral, writing poignant letters to the media asking for privacy, and breaking down in interviews, my team was quietly building a case file on her. Naomi Yamada, born 1973, I read from the file as I pinned her photo to my investigation board. 3 failed marriages before Takashi, all to men in their early 20s. Opened a bar 3 years ago after working various hospitality jobs. No criminal record, but multiple school transfers as a teenager due to behavioral issues. What struck me most was how Naomi handled herself at Takashi's funeral. She was the picture of a grieving widow, haggard, pale, occasionally pausing to compose herself before breaking down again. Everyone present was moved by her display of raw emotion. But then came our first real lead. "Detective, you need to see this," Officer Chen said, hurrying into my office with a flash drive. We got the surveillance footage from near Naomi's bar. We gathered around my computer screen, watching grainy black and white footage from the night of the murder. At 1:05 a.m., Takashi entered the bar, At 4:40 a.m., his silver van left the parking lot, but the driver wasn't Takashi. The image was blurry, but it was clearly someone else. "Can we enhance this?" I asked, leaning closer. "Already working on it," Chen replied. "But there's more." At 5:18 a.m., Naomi drove her own car home. About 40 minutes later, she called the police. I sat back in my chair, the pieces starting to come together. She lied about Takashi driving home himself. The forensics report came in next, dropping another bombshell. Traces of sleeping pills in Takashi's system, along with small amounts of blood and urine on the floor of Naomi's bar. The picture was becoming clearer. Takashi had been drugged, then strangled at the bar. His body was then transported in his own van. "We need to identify the driver of that van," I told my team, "and I want to know if Naomi has been seeing anyone." It took 2 weeks of careful investigation, interviews with bar patrons, background checks, and surveillance before we had our answer. Hiroshi Tanaka, 29, an ordinary company employee who frequently visited Naomi's bar. And according to several witnesses, he and Naomi seemed unusually close. "Have you noticed anyone unusual spending time with Mrs. Yamada since her husband's death?" I asked one of their neighbors, careful not to lead the witness. The neighbor hesitated. "Well, there's this younger guy. Been coming around a lot. Actually, he moved in last week. She said he's just a friend helping out, but what? They don't act like just friends. And it seemed awfully fast after her husband's death." The final piece fell into place when we discovered Naomi had secretly increased Takashi's life insurance policy from 46 million to 80 million yen just weeks before his death. What would you do at this point, viewers? Would you bring Naomi in for questioning or continue gathering evidence? Let me know in the comments. And if you're enjoying this deep dive into detective work, don't forget to like this video. The arrest 2 months after Takashi's murder, we had enough evidence for arrest warrants. The morning of July 24, 2018, my team and I arrived at Naomi's home. The same home where I'd interviewed her as a grieving widow was now the scene of her arrest. Hiroshi was there too. He had indeed moved in shortly after Takashi's death. They both seemed shocked when we announced the charges, but neither resisted. At the station, faced with overwhelming evidence, the surveillance footage now enhanced to clearly show Hiroshi driving Takashi's van, the toxicology report confirming sleeping pills, and financial records showing the insurance policy change, Naomi's perfect mask finally cracked. Her confession revealed a coldly calculated plan. She and Hiroshi had been lovers since early 2018. She had wanted to divorce Takashi, but he refused. Blinded by their affair, they plotted to eliminate him. The original plan had failed when Takashi unexpectedly came to the bar telling Naomi someone had broken into their home. Thinking quickly, she drugged his drink with sleeping pills. Once unconscious, she called Hiroshi, and together they strangled Takashi with an electrical cord. Hiroshi then drove the van with Takashi's body to the residential area where it was later discovered. What struck me most during Naomi's confession was her demeanor, flat, emotionless, completely different from the grief-stricken widow I'd first met. The contrast was jarring, revealing just how completely she had performed her role of the devastated wife. 3 weeks after the arrests, we brought in a third suspect, Aiko, Naomi's 69-year-old mother on suspicion of being an accomplice. However, due to insufficient evidence, she was not prosecuted. The trial. I sat in the courtroom on May 19, 2019, watching as Naomi and Hiroshi entered. Once united in passion strong enough to kill for, they now sat apart, refusing to look at each other. As the trial progressed, they turned against one another, each trying to minimize their own involvement. Hiroshi claimed he acted out of love for Naomi, believing she wanted to divorce Takashi, but couldn't. Naomi's defense painted her as manipulated by a younger lover. The evidence we'd gathered spoke louder than their accusations. After a lengthy trial, the verdict came on July 30, 2019. Naomi Yamada, 46, sentenced to 17 years in prison. Hiroshi Tanaka, 30, received 14 years. As they were led away, I couldn't help but think about Takashi, a young man described by everyone as exceptionally kind, who had no idea the danger lurking beside him at night was the woman who had vowed to love him forever. Reflection. This case stays with me, not just for the calculated nature of the crime, but for the performance Naomi gave afterward. Her grief-stricken appearances at the funeral, her emotional interviews with the media, her calls for privacy to honor her husband's memory, all while knowing exactly what had happened to him. The human capacity for deception is something I continue to grapple with even after decades in this job. I've learned to look beyond tears and trembling hands, to search for inconsistencies in stories, to follow evidence rather than emotion. Naomi's acting skills were exceptional, perhaps honed through years of navigating troubled relationships. But in the end, physical evidence, surveillance footage, and financial records told the true story that her performance tried to hide. If there's one lesson from this case, it's that sometimes the person who appears most devastated by a crime may be the very one who committed it. In my years as a detective, I've learned that masks, no matter how convincing, eventually slip. What signs did you notice that might have revealed Naomi's true nature? Would you have suspected her earlier? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more cases from my files. Case 2. The Perfect Marriage, the Mysterious Death. Before we get into our second case, if you're finding these investigations fascinating, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps me bring more unsolved mysteries to light. The Unsolved Mystery of Robert Sanders. The evening sun cast long shadows across the suburban Virginia neighborhood as I pulled up to the Sanders residence. The call had come in about 30 minutes earlier. Possible homicide, affluent neighborhood, victim found by spouse. As I ducked under the yellow tape and made my way upstairs, I couldn't have known I was walking into one of the most divisive cases of my career, one that would challenge everything I thought I knew about evidence, motive, and justice. Robert Sanders, 34, lay on his bed, a single gunshot wound to the head. The bullet had passed through the wall into the adjacent children's room. His wife, Mai Sanders, a Vietnamese-American financial executive, stood trembling in the hallway, her normally composed demeanor shattered. "I just found him like this when I came home from work," she whispered, her eyes wide with shock. "The room was ransacked. I thought someone broke in." The puzzle pieces didn't fit neatly together from the start. No signs of forced entry. A gun registered to the couple found in their bedroom cabinet, but not the murder weapon. A history of marital troubles following Robert's affair. Secret text messages on Mai's phone to a male colleague. 2 young children and extended family. In the home at the time of death. Was this a grieving widow caught in a nightmare or a calculating killer who staged a crime scene. The community was divided, the media obsessed, and my investigation about to expose secrets hidden beneath the veneer of a perfect marriage. After 10 months of investigation, my Sanders was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. The prosecution built a circumstantial case on motive, opportunity, and inconsistencies in her story. But after 9 days of trial and contentious deliberations, the jury returned a stunning verdict: not guilty. Sometimes, even with all the evidence laid out, the truth remains elusive. This is one of those cases that haunts me still, because someone got away with murder, or because an innocent person was nearly convicted of a crime they didn't commit. Let me take you through it all, step by step, as I experienced it. And as I share this case with you, ask yourself, what would you have decided if you sat on that jury? The perfect family? The Sanders family seemed to have it all. Robert, a promising engineer at a prestigious consulting firm, a rising star in finance with a 6-figure salary, 2 beautiful children, and a comfortable home in Vienna, Virginia. College sweethearts who met at Virginia Tech. They'd been together for 15 years before tragedy struck. When I first interviewed my Sanders that fateful evening on July 31st, 2015, she appeared every bit the shocked, grieving widow. Her account was detailed and precise, delivered with the occasional pause as she fought back tears. Robert had been sick earlier this week, she explained, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The doctor thought it was food poisoning. He was feeling better, but this morning he said he wasn't well again and went back to bed when I left for work. According to she'd left the house around 7:30 a.m. with Robert still in bed. Her sister and brother-in-law, who lived with them, were home all day with the children. She went to work, attended meetings, grabbed lunch at Panera Bread, and texted her husband several times with no response. I wasn't worried at first, she said, her voice steady despite her evident distress. Last time he was sick, he slept most of the day. My sister texted that he wasn't answering when she knocked, but we just thought he needed rest. When Mai returned home around 6:00 p.m., she checked on Robert and discovered the nightmarish scene, their bedroom in disarray, drawers pulled open, and her husband lying motionless on the bed with a fatal gunshot wound. I knew something was terribly wrong, she recounted. I closed the door immediately. I didn't want the children to see and called 911. Everything about her story seemed reasonable. Her timeline was specific, her reactions appropriate. The phone call to emergency services, which I listened to multiple times, conveyed genuine panic. But as I walked through the Sanders home that evening, certain details nagged at me. The bedroom had been ransacked, yes, but nothing of value appeared to be missing except Robert's phone. The rest of the house was untouched. No broken windows, no forced entry. Do you own any firearms, Mrs. Sanders? I asked as we concluded our initial interview. She nodded. Robert bought one this spring for protection. I wasn't comfortable with it, but I agreed. It should be in our bedroom cabinet. We were planning to take a safety class. The gun was indeed there, a .37 caliber handgun, unused. But the medical examiner would later determine that Robert had been killed with a .40 caliber weapon. As I left the Sanders home that night, the rain had started again, matching my clouded thoughts. This case wasn't going to be straightforward. Something felt off, but I couldn't yet put my finger on what. What would you be thinking at this point in the investigation? Would you focus on Mai as a suspect or look elsewhere? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Cracks in the foundation. It took weeks of careful investigation before the first significant cracks in the Sanders' perfect marriage came to light. While interviewing Robert's colleagues, one mentioned in passing that Robert had been distracted at work the previous year because of problems at home. He mentioned someone named Justine, the colleague said hesitantly. I got the impression it was an affair, but Robert never talked about it directly. Just said he'd made a mistake and was trying to fix things with his wife. When we obtained Robert's phone records, we discovered a pattern of calls to an unregistered number that had abruptly stopped 6 months before his death. Despite extensive efforts, we never located this Justine or confirmed whether the affair was real or imagined. Meanwhile, digital forensics on Mai's devices revealed intimate text exchanges with a male colleague at her firm messages that used code words and expressed emotional support during her marital difficulties. I called Mai in for a second interview, this time at the station. She arrived promptly, still composed but noticeably thinner than at our first meeting. When I mentioned the text messages, she didn't deny them. After I found out about Robert's affair, I was devastated, she admitted, her gaze direct but pained. This colleague was kind to me. We became close, but it never went beyond a few kisses. We both knew it was wrong. And how were things between you and Robert at the time of his death? I pressed. We were healing, she said firmly. We'd had a good talk at Hockey House a few weeks before. I'd forgiven him. I wanted our marriage to work for our children's sake. They deserved their father, regardless of our mistakes. Her answers were consistent with her previous statements. No contradictions I could seize upon. Yet the circumstances remained troubling. A husband shot in his sleep, a missing murder weapon, a wife who had discovered her husband's infidelity, and text messages suggesting an emotional connection with another man. Was it enough for a case? Not yet, but it was enough to keep Mai Sanders at the center of our investigation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected direction. 2 months after Robert's death, forensic analysis of the bedroom scene revealed microscopic blood spatter patterns inconsistent with Mai's account of discovering the body. If she had entered the room, seen Robert, and immediately backed away as she claimed, certain blood evidence wouldn't have been disturbed in the way it was. It wasn't definitive proof of guilt, but it raised serious questions about her version of events. Viewers, blood spatter analysis can tell us a lot about what happened at a crime scene. Have you ever followed a case where forensic evidence contradicted witness testimony? Share in the comments below. The case against Mai Tin. Months into the investigation, in March 2016, we made the difficult decision to arrest Mai Sanders for the murder of her husband. The evidence, while circumstantial, had reached a critical mass that couldn't be ignored. 1. Mai had discovered her husband's affair, providing a potential motive. 2. She had formed an emotional bond with a male colleague. 3. Blood spatter evidence suggested inconsistencies in her discovery of the body. 4. The missing murder weapon, .40 caliber, was the same caliber as a gun her brother had loaned to Robert, which was now unaccounted for. 5. No signs of forced entry meant the killer likely had legitimate access to the home. 6. The selective ransacking of only the bedroom suggested staging. Most damning was the testimony from Mai's sister, who confirmed that Robert was still alive when Mai left for work that morning, and that no one had entered or left the house until Mai returned that evening. The arrest sent shock waves through the community. Mai Sanders, educated, successful, with no criminal history, charged with first-degree murder. The media coverage was intense, with opinions sharply divided between those who saw a calculating killer and those who believed in a grieving widow's innocence. Throughout her 5-hour interrogation, Mai maintained her composure and her story. Even when directly accused of murdering her husband, she simply replied, "I did not kill Robert." Her attorney, Peter Greenspan, was equally adamant. The state has no evidence beyond speculation and circumstance. My client is innocent, a mother of 2 young children who is already suffering the loss of her husband. This prosecution is adding tragedy upon tragedy. As the case moved toward trial, public opinion increasingly turned against our department. Mai's cooperation with investigators, her decision to stay in the community, her continued care of her children, and her willingness to maintain relationships with Robert's family all seemed inconsistent with guilt. The question that haunted me as we prepared for trial: were we making a terrible mistake, or had Mai Sanders performed the perfect crime? The trial. The courtroom was packed on the first day of trial. Robert's family sat on one side, stern-faced and united in their belief in Mai's guilt. On the other side, Mai's supporters, colleagues, friends, and family members offered quiet encouragement. Mai herself sat beside her attorney, dressed conservatively in a navy suit, her expression neutral but attentive. Throughout the proceedings, she took notes on a legal pad, occasionally conferring quietly with Greenspan. The prosecution's case relied heavily on establishing motive and opportunity. They portrayed Mai as a woman scorned, seeking revenge for her husband's betrayal and freedom to pursue her relationship with her colleague. They emphasized the unusual circumstances: a gun missing, a bedroom ransacked, but nothing stolen, and no signs of forced entry. Robert Sanders was executed while he slept, the prosecutor declared dramatically in his opening statement. Shot in the head in his own beta place, where he should have been safe. Greenspan's defense strategy was systematic and effective. He challenged every piece of circumstantial evidence, highlighting alternative explanations and reasonable doubt. He called character witnesses who spoke of Mai's integrity and devotion to her children. He established Mai's strong financial position, undermining any financial motive. Most powerful was the testimony of Mai's colleague, the man with whom she had exchanged intimate messages. Rather than the passionate affair the prosecution had suggested, he described a friendship that had briefly crossed boundaries during a time of emotional vulnerability, but had been mutually ended before anything serious developed. "We shared 2 kisses over the course of several months," he testified. Mai was clear that she was committed to working things out with Robert. Our conversations were primarily about supporting each other through difficult times. The prosecution's case was further weakened when they could not produce the murder weapon or any physical evidence directly linking Mai to the crime. The blood spatter evidence, while suspicious, was ultimately inconclusive. After 9 days of testimony, the case went to the jury. They deliberated for a day and a half, at one point sending out a note indicating they were deadlocked. The judge instructed them to continue their deliberations. On June 30th, 2017, the verdict was announced: not guilty. The courtroom erupted in contrasting emotions. cries of relief from Mai's supporters, stunned silence from Robert's family. Mai herself showed little reaction, though one of her relatives smiled broadly. As I watched her leave the courthouse free to return to her children and rebuild her life, I was left with the detective's perpetual question. Had justice been served, or had it been denied? Final thoughts. Years have passed since the Sanders case, but it continues to haunt me. Some nights I still find myself reviewing the case files, wondering what evidence we missed, what questions we should have asked, what leads we failed to follow. Was Mai Sanders an innocent woman wrongfully accused, or did she commit the perfect murder and walk free? The American justice system requires proof beyond reasonable doubt, and in this case, that standard wasn't met. The jury did their job based on the evidence presented, yet Robert Sanders is still dead, killed by someone's hand. His children grow up without their father. His murder remains technically unsolved. As a detective, cases like these remind me that the search for truth is often complex and elusive. Evidence can be ambiguous, motives unclear, witnesses unreliable. We build cases on facts, but juries decide based on their perception of those facts, and sometimes perception and reality diverge. If there's a lesson in the Sanders case, perhaps it's this: appearances can be deceiving. The perfect marriage may hide deep fractures. The grieving widow may or may not be what she seems. And sometimes the truth about what happened in a bedroom on a summer morning may remain forever hidden, known only to the deceased and whoever pulled the trigger. What do you think happened in the Sanders case? Was justice served by the not guilty verdict? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section. And if you've appreciated this deep dive into one of my most challenging cases, please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories from my files. Closing thoughts. These two cases, Naomi Yamada and Mai Sanders, represent opposite ends of the investigative spectrum. In one, evidence led to conviction. In the other, reasonable doubt led to acquittal. Yet they share a common thread: the complexity of human relationships and the sometimes thin line between love and violence. As a detective, I've seen how passion can turn deadly, how marriages can conceal dark secrets, and how difficult it can be to determine the truth when those closest to the victim become the primary suspects. If you take anything away from these stories, let it be these lessons. 1. Appearances can be deceiving. The grieving spouse may not always be what they seem. 2. Pay attention to changes in behavior or financial arrangements before tragedy strikes. 3. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong in a relationship. 4. Remember that even the most seemingly perfect marriages can harbor hidden troubles. Please share this video with friends and family as a reminder that sometimes the greatest dangers come from those we trust most. Like and subscribe for more cases from my files, and leave your questions and thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, this is Detective Shernan, reminding you to stay safe and vigilant, because the truth, however painful, is always worth finding.